My name is Maya Vance. I'm 29 years old, and 3 days ago, on the single most important afternoon of my professional life, I found out my mother had stolen my future. She didn't just take the money, she took the one thing I thought was untouchable, a promise from my grandfather, sealed in a trust fund worth nearly $500,000. That money wasn't just for a dream. It was my grandfather's way of saying, "I see you, Maya, even when no one else does." My mother used it to build a monument to my brother's failure, and when I asked her why, she looked me in the eye and called it an investment in the family's greater good. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I simply did what I have always done. I went back to my blueprints. But this time, I wasn't designing a building. I was drafting the demolition of a life built on lies. Before we go any further, if this story resonates with that part of you that has ever felt overlooked, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. It tells me that I'm not alone, and you aren't either. Now, let's go back to Tuesday. The day the glass floor of my life shattered into a million pieces. The air in the conference room of the Northern Trust Bank Tower was cool and still, smelling faintly of lemon polish and old money. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window, Chicago stretched out under a crisp autumn sky, a grid of ambition and steel. My city. The city I'd spent a decade helping to shape, one building, one blueprint at a time. Across the mahogany table, Robert Chen, the principal of Chen Architecture, slid the final purchase agreement toward me. His smile was genuine, a little tired. For 10 years he'd been my mentor. Today, he was selling me his legacy. "Maya," he said, his voice raspy with emotion, "you've earned this. The firm is yours." My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The firm is yours. The words echoed in my head, a mantra I'd repeated to myself through countless sleepless nights and grueling deadlines. I'd started as an intern, fetching coffee and running blueprints. I became an associate, then a senior architect. I led the team that designed the Lakeside Pavilion that won the AIA award. I had poured my entire 20s into this firm, sacrificing weekends, relationships, and the carefree life my friends seemed to lead. The price was $450,000, and I had it. Or, I thought I did. The money came from my grandfather, Arthur Vance. He wasn't like the rest of my family. He was a craftsman, a master of bespoke glass art. He saw the world not in terms of status, but in lines, light, and structure. He saw the architect in me before I even knew what the word meant. When I was born, he established the Arthur Vance Legacy Trust. For my future, he'd said, for my foundation. It was untouchable until I was 25, managed by a custodian. That custodian was my mother, Evelyn. "I just need to make a quick call to authorize the wire transfer," I said to Robert, my voice steadier than I felt. I excused myself to a small private office. My fingers trembled slightly as I dialed the number for my private banker, a woman named Ms. Albright. This was the moment, the culmination of everything. "Good afternoon, Ms. Vance," she said, her voice professional and warm. "How can I help you?" "Hello, Miss Albright. I'm ready to initiate the wire transfer from the Arthur Vance Legacy Trust. The full amount, $450,000. I gave her the account details for the firm's escrow. Routine. A simple transaction I had visualized 1,000 times. There was a pause. Not a long one, but it was dense. I could hear the soft, frantic clicking of her keyboard, a sound like tiny, nervous insects. "One moment, Ms. Vance. I'm pulling up the account now." I stared out the window at the Sears Tower, a monument to ambition. I was about to own a piece of this skyline, my own piece. The clicking stopped. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't a pause, it was a void. "Ms. Vance," she began, her tone carefully stripped of all emotion. It was the kind of voice you use to deliver catastrophic news. "I'm looking at the current balance for this trust account." Another beat of silence, as if she was giving me a moment to brace myself. "The current balance is $12.41. I didn't laugh. Drew Collins laughed. I didn't. Laughter requires air, and it felt as though every molecule of oxygen had been sucked out of the small office, out of my lungs, out of the world. The city noise beyond the glass wall seemed to fade into a dull, distant roar. $12. The words didn't compute. They were alien characters from a language I didn't understand. "There must be a mistake," I said. The sentence came out flat, mechanical. It was a line from a movie, not something a real person says. "The balance should be approximately 450,000. Perhaps you're looking at the wrong account." "I've triple-checked the account number, Ms. Vance. The Arthur Vance Legacy Trust." Her voice was gentle now, laced with a pity that felt like acid on my skin. "I'm looking at the transaction history. I see a series of significant withdrawals over the past 24 months. My hand, holding the phone, was perfectly still. My architect's mind, the part of me that sees patterns and structure in chaos, began to function on pure, cold adrenaline. Withdrawals? Yes, multiple transfers, ranging from $20,000 to $50,000 per transaction. Her keyboard started clicking again, a slow, funereal rhythm. "The first one was in August, 2 years ago. The last one was 3 weeks ago. It cleared out the remaining balance. 24 months. 2 years. My mind raced backward, a frantic flipbook of images. Julian, my younger brother, announcing his disruptive new crypto venture. My mother, Evelyn, hosting a lavish dinner party to celebrate his genius. Julian showing off renderings of his new penthouse apartment in Manhattan, a place he needed, he'd claimed, to network with the right people. I remembered asking my mother how he could afford it. "Your brother is a visionary, Maya," she had said, a dismissive wave of her hand. "Investors are lining up to fund him. You wouldn't understand. It's a different world from your little blueprints." A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, began to settle in my chest. It wasn't a sudden shock. It was a creeping recognition. The slow, agonizing realization that all the puzzle pieces I had refused to look at, all the little inconsistencies and extravagant expenses I had chalked up to my family's usual financial fog, were now snapping into place to form a single, monstrous picture. Who authorized these transfers?" I whispered, even though I already knew the answer. I knew it in my bones. Ms. Albright's hesitation was confirmation enough. The withdrawals were all initiated and authorized by the sole custodian on the account, Ms. Vance. As per the trust's legal structure, she had fiduciary control until you formally requested a full transfer. She took a soft breath. "The authorizations were all signed by Mrs. Evelyn Vance." My mother. The name hung in the air. Evelyn, not Mom. The polished, perfect matriarch of the Vance family. The woman whose love was a currency, distributed based on performance and appearances. The woman who saw Julian as the family's future star, and me as the reliable, self-sufficient, and ultimately expendable workhorse. Through the window, a plane traced a silent white line across the blue canvas of the sky. It was moving forward. Everything in the world was moving forward. But I was frozen. The mahogany table in the next room, the unsigned contract, my mentor waiting for me, it all belonged to a life I was supposed to have. A life that had just been stolen from me, not by a stranger, but by the one person who was supposed to be its guardian. "Ms. Vance, are you still there?" I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. I saw a woman in a perfectly tailored suit, the picture of success. I saw a ghost. "Thank you, Miss Albright," I said, my voice a stranger's. "I have all the information I need." I ended the call and stood there for a full minute, the silence of the room pressing in on me. Then, I walked out of that office, past the unsigned contract, and away from the life I had earned, and I drove toward the one that had been chosen for me. The drive from downtown Chicago to the manicured lawns of Oak Brook was a blur. I don't remember the traffic on the Eisenhower Expressway. I don't remember the turns. My mind was a maelstrom of clicking keyboards and the number 12. My body, however, was on autopilot, taking me home. Home. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. The Vance family home wasn't just a house, it was a statement. A sprawling Tudor-style mansion Evelyn had meticulously designed and decorated to project an image of old money and effortless class. Tonight, it was ablaze with light. Valets in crisp white jackets were parking a line of Mercedes and BMWs along the circular driveway. It was my parents' 30th wedding anniversary party, an event Evelyn had been planning for a year. A celebration of a partnership I now understood in horrifying new terms. I parked my own modest Audi down the street and walked up the stone path, the sound of string music and muted laughter growing louder. I felt like a ghost drifting toward a life I no longer belonged to. As I stepped through the grand entryway, memories ambushed me. Not the happy Hallmark card kind, but the small, sharp-edged ones that, when pieced together, told the real story of our family. I saw myself at 12, proudly showing my mother a complex model of a bridge I'd built, only for her to wave it away. "That's lovely, Maya, but can you please go help the caterer? Julian's friends are arriving for his birthday party." I saw myself at 17, sitting at the kitchen table, mapping out scholarship applications while my father co-signed a loan for Julian's first sports car, a car he crashed 2 months later. I saw a lifetime of being the strong one, the responsible one, the daughter who never asked for anything because she learned early on that there was nothing to get. My strength wasn't a virtue. It was a convenience. It was the excuse they used to focus all their resources, all their hopes, and all their desperate, suffocating ambition on Julian. Julian was standing near the fireplace, a glass of champagne in his hand, holding court. He was telling some animated story, and a circle of my mother's friends were hanging on his every word. He looked the part of the young tech mogul, an expensive, artfully distressed jacket, a confident smile that never quite reached his eyes. The smile of a man who had never faced a single consequence in his life. He caught my eye and gave me a little salute with his glass. I felt nothing, just a vast, cold emptiness. My father, Richard Vance, was by the bar, talking to one of his business partners. He was a handsome man, perpetually tanned, with a presence that filled a room. But I knew the truth. He was a hollow man, a supporting actor in the drama that was my mother's life. He followed her lead in all things, especially when it came to his children. His silence was his complicity. It always had been. And then I saw her, my mother. Evelyn was in her element. She wore a shimmering silver gown, her blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon. She moved through the crowd like a queen, a perfectly rehearsed smile on her face, her hand lightly touching an arm here, a shoulder there. She was the architect of this perfect evening, this perfect life, this perfect family. A life built on a foundation of lies, with the pilings sunk deep into my stolen future. She spotted me and her smile widened, a brilliant, blinding flash of white teeth. "Maya, darling, you're here! I was getting worried." She glided toward me, her arms outstretched for a hug. The scent of her Chanel No. 5 perfume, a scent I used to associate with comfort, now smelled like betrayal. I didn't move. I didn't step into her embrace. I just stood there, a stone in the glittering river of her party. Her arms dropped to her sides, and the perfect smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. She saw it in my eyes. She saw that I knew. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low and dangerously calm. Her expression shifted. The hostess mask dissolved, replaced by a cool, appraising look. "Not now, Maya. We have guests." "Now," I said. And in that single word, the dynamic of our entire lives shifted on its axis. The strong one was no longer being convenient. She led me not to a private study or a quiet library, but to the center of the living room. It was a power move, a deliberate choice. She was bringing the confrontation into her arena, surrounded by her audience, the carefully curated guests who formed the bedrock of her social standing. The string quartet was playing something by Vivaldi. A waiter offered me a flute of champagne. I stared at him until he backed away. My mother took a fresh glass, her movements fluid and unbothered. "What is so important, Maya, that it couldn't wait?" she asked, her voice a perfectly modulated murmur. But I could see the tightness around her eyes. She was bracing for impact, not with fear, but with the weary annoyance of a monarch dealing with a petulant courtier. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was a bomb, and I was just going to roll it gently into the middle of her manicured world. I was at the bank today, Mother. I was finalizing the purchase of Robert Chen's firm. A flicker of something. Was it pride? Relief? Crossed her face. That's wonderful, darling. I always knew you had it in you. The purchase price is $450,000, I continued, my voice level, each word a carefully placed stone. The money was supposed to come from Grandfather Arthur's trust fund. I let that hang in the air for a moment. I watched her face. Nothing. No guilt, no panic, just a careful, calculating stillness. And, she prompted, taking a delicate sip of her champagne. And the balance is $12, I said. The chatter in the room around us didn't stop, but it seemed to thin, to create a pocket of silence around the two of us. A few heads turned. I saw my father, still by the bar, watching us. He didn't move, but his hand tightened around his glass. He knew. Of course he knew. My mother sighed, a theatrical exhalation of manufactured patience. It was a sound I had heard my entire life, usually right before she explained why Julian's latest disaster was actually a brilliant strategic pivot. She turned slightly, a subtle shift that brought a few more of her closest friends into our orbit. She was positioning her witnesses. Maya, she said, her voice now carrying a note of pained condescension. I was going to tell you. We simply had to reallocate some family assets. It was a strategic decision. Reallocate? The word was so sterile, so corporate. You drained my trust fund. You took every last cent my grandfather saved for me. That's not reallocation. That's theft. For the first time, a flash of genuine anger broke through her composure. Her eyes narrowed. Don't be so dramatic. It's not theft when it stays within the family. Julian's venture needed a significant capital infusion. A real one, not the dribs and drabs his early investors were providing. He was on the verge of a breakthrough. His crypto scam failed, Mother. I read about it a month ago. He lost everything. A temporary setback, she snapped, her voice rising just enough to draw more attention. She lowered it again, regaining control, transforming her anger into a martyr's burden. She placed a hand on her chest. Sometimes, in a family, you have to make difficult choices. You have to support the one with the most potential, the one who will carry the family name forward in a meaningful way. She looked me up and down, a slow, deliberate appraisal. The successful architect, the good daughter, the reliable one. And in her eyes, I saw only my utility. She saw a finished product, a tool that had served its purpose. Then she delivered the line, the one that would be seared into my memory forever. She raised her glass, a toast to her own twisted logic, and spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Maya, you were already strong. You already had a foundation. Julian didn't. He needed the launchpad to truly become the heir to the Vance legacy. You're just an architect, but he is going to be a legend. This wasn't theft, darling. It was a redistribution for the greater good. My father stood frozen across the room. He met my eyes for a fleeting second, then looked away, busying himself by adjusting the cuff of his expensive suit. A suit I'd bought him for his birthday last year, with a bonus from the Pavilion project. His silence was his signature on her withdrawal slip. It was his final betrayal. The faces of her friends swam before me, a mixture of shock, discomfort, and a few nods of what looked like understanding. They lived in this world. They understood this brutal calculus. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just fighting my mother. I was fighting an entire system that saw my strength not as a gift, but as a license to abandon me. I didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. Her pronouncement, delivered with the casual cruelty of a queen ordering an execution, had said it all. To argue, to scream, to cry in the middle of her perfectly orchestrated party would be to give her exactly what she wanted, a scene. It would cast me as the hysterical, ungrateful daughter, and her as the long-suffering matriarch. I would not give her the satisfaction. I turned my back on her, on the Vivaldi, on the champagne, on the hushed whispers that followed me like a cloud of insects. I walked past my father, who flinched as I approached but refused to meet my gaze. I walked past my brother, whose smug expression had been replaced by a faint look of confusion, as if he was only just beginning to process what he'd heard. I walked out of that house, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind me, severing a cord that had been fraying for 29 years. The night air was cold, and it felt good against my burning cheeks. I got in my car and drove, this time with no destination in mind. I just drove through the darkened, wealthy suburbs, past houses with glowing windows, each one a little diorama of a life I would never have, a family I no longer recognized as my own. The initial inferno of rage had burned itself out, leaving behind something harder and colder. It was the calm that comes after a building collapses. Silence, dust, and the stark reality of the wreckage. My mother was right about one thing. I was strong. I had built my entire life on my own foundation, and she had just taken a sledgehammer to it. But architects don't just mourn a demolition. They survey the damage. They assess the remaining structures. They look for what can be salvaged and what needs to be rebuilt. I drove back to my apartment in the city, a loft space in an old converted warehouse in the West Loop. It was my sanctuary. Exposed brick walls, steel beams, and a massive drafting table that served as the heart of the home. It was a space defined by clean lines, honest materials, and light. Everything my family home was not. I made a cup of strong black tea and sat at my drafting table, the city lights twinkling below. The grief was there, a heavy weight in my chest. The grief for the mother I wished I had. The grief for the grandfather whose legacy had been so casually defiled. But underneath the grief, a new feeling was taking root. Resolve. It was a cold, quiet, and absolutely unshakable resolve. My mother operated in a world of appearances, social currency, and backroom whispers. A lawsuit would be messy, protracted. She would paint it as a sordid family squabble. She would use her army of friends and expensive lawyers to drag my name through the mud. I would be fighting on her turf, by her rules. I needed a different way. A way that would hit her not just in her bank account, but in her reputation, the only thing she truly valued. I needed leverage she couldn't predict. And that's when I remembered it. A memory from childhood, so mundane I had almost forgotten it. My grandfather Arthur, sitting in his dusty workshop, handing me a small, ornate brass key. "This is for the old storage unit, Maya Bird," he'd said, his voice smelling of sawdust and turpentine. "Not much in there now but old things, but one day you might find a use for it. You see the things other people miss." For years, that key had sat in a small wooden box on my dresser, a sentimental relic from a beloved grandparent. I hadn't thought about it in a decade. I walked into my bedroom and opened the box. The key was still there, cold and heavy in my palm. The old storage unit, a place my mother had dismissed as Arthur's junk collection, a place she had never bothered to visit, a place she had likely forgotten existed entirely. My grandfather was a meticulous man, a man who understood structure and legacy. He had left me the trust fund, yes, but he had also left me this key. And as I closed my fist around it, I knew, with the certainty of a perfectly drawn blueprint, that he had left me something more. He had left me the tools for my reconstruction. The address on the old key tag led me to a part of the city that progress had forgotten. A collection of low-slung brick warehouses near the old stockyards, their windows clouded with decades of grime, their facades whispering stories of industry and decay. It was a place of honest work and slow obsolescence, a world away from the gleaming towers downtown or the curated perfection of Oakbrook. My grandfather had kept a workshop here for 40 years. My mother had never once set foot in it. The key was stiff in the lock. I had to put my shoulder into the heavy steel door, and it groaned open with the sound of rusted metal scraping against concrete. The air that hit me was thick and cool, a time capsule of a scent. Dry wood, oil, dust, and the faint, clean smell of cold glass. For a moment, I was a child again, my small hand lost in my grandfather's calloused one as he led me through this same door. "This is where the magic happens, Maya Bird," he used to say. The space was cavernous. A weak afternoon light filtered through the filthy skylights, illuminating swirling dust motes like tiny captured stars. Most of the heavy equipment, the kilns, the cutting tables, had been sold off after his death, but his personal workspace was still here, cordoned off in a corner and draped in heavy canvas tarps, just as he'd left it. It was a ghost of a place, but it felt more like home than the mansion I had just fled. There was an honesty in the dust, a truth in the decay. I made my way to his old oak desk, a massive, battle-scarred piece of furniture standing against the far wall. I ran my hand over its surface, tracing the gouges and stains that were a map of his life's work. My mother had wanted to throw it out. "It's a monstrosity, Maya," she'd declared. "It doesn't fit our aesthetic." I had insisted on keeping it, and in her typical fashion, she had forgotten about it the moment it was out of her sight. I tried the drawers. Locked. I used the small secondary key from the same ring, and they opened. The first few were filled with old tools, catalogs for colored glass, and stacks of receipts. The bottom drawer, however, held a simple cedar-lined box. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. Inside were 4 leather-bound journals, their pages yellowed with age. His handwriting, a strong, angular script, filled every page. This was his real legacy, not the money, but his thoughts. I sat down in his creaky wooden chair and began to read. The early entries were about his work, technical notes on annealing temperatures and chemical compounds for new colors. But as the years went on, they became more personal. He wrote about my grandmother's passing. He wrote about his pride and his worry. And he wrote about his children. October 12, 1998, one entry read, "Evelyn brought little Maya to the studio today. She is 5. Evelyn was impatient, worried about the dust on her coat, but Maya, she has the builder's eye. She didn't see the mess. She saw the light through the colored panes. She spent an hour arranging scrap pieces into a little city of glass. She understands. She sees the structure inside the chaos." A lump formed in my throat. I flipped through the years, my own life unfolding through his observations. May 3, 2010. Richard called today. Julian has been expelled from his prep school. Another one. Evelyn is already spinning it, planning a trip to Europe for him to find himself. Richard just sighs and agrees. They are pouring water into a bucket with no bottom. All the while, Maya quietly wins a citywide science fair with her bridge design. They barely seem to notice. I fear they see her strength as an infinite resource, something that requires no tending. The final entries, written in the last year of his life, were the most painful. His handwriting was shakier, but his thoughts were sharp as glass. January 22, 2018. Had lunch with Evelyn. All she talks about is status. Who is on what board? Who bought what house? She sees value only in what can be displayed, not in what can be built. She confuses price with value. I have made her the custodian of Maya's trust. I pray I have not made a grave error. I pray she sees it as a duty, not an opportunity. But I have seen how she looks at Julian's endless needs, and it makes my heart grow cold. I closed the final journal, the worn leather cool beneath my fingertips. The truth was here. He had seen it all. He had feared this exact betrayal. This wasn't just a theft of money. It was a desecration of his trust, a violation of his deepest wishes. I was no longer just a victim. I was the custodian of his memory. And I would not fail him. With the journals resting on the desk like a testament, I stood up and faced the rest of his shrouded workspace. The canvas tarps, gray with a fine layer of dust, hung like silent curtains on a stage. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. She sees value only in what can be displayed. My mother thought this place was just junk, old things, a forgotten liability. She had never bothered to look under the sheets. My hands were steady as I reached for the corner of the nearest tarp. It was heavy, stiff with age. I pulled. The canvas slid away with a soft, whooshing sound, releasing a cloud of dust that danced in the shafts of light. And then, the breath caught in my throat. It wasn't junk. It was a forest of glass, Arranged on sturdy wooden shelves and pedestals were dozens of his works. Not the commercial pieces he'd sold to galleries, but his private collection. The experimental works. The ones that were too personal, too strange, too beloved to sell. Each piece was a captured moment of light and form. There was a swirling vortex of cobalt blue and emerald green that seemed to pull the very air into it. There was a delicate, crystalline sculpture of a bird taking flight, its wings so thin they were nearly translucent. There was a series of abstract architectural forms, towers and bridges of layered, fused glass that played with perspective and light in a way that made my architect's heart ache with joy. I moved from piece to piece, my fingers tracing the cool, smooth surfaces. This was his soul. I could see the evolution of his artistry, the years of his life, his joys and his sorrows, all rendered in silica and fire. I recognized a small, imperfect piece from my childhood, the little city of glass from his journal entry. He had kept it all these years. In the center of the collection, on a place of honor, sat the masterpiece. It was a large, breathtaking panel of etched and fused glass depicting a single ancient oak tree, its branches reaching for a sky of pale, opalescent light. But when you looked closer, you saw that the trunk of the tree was composed of hundreds of tiny, intricate human figures, all interwoven, supporting each other. The piece was called Legacy. I sank into the dusty wooden chair, overwhelmed. This collection, it was priceless. Not just in monetary terms, though I knew it was worth a fortune. Its true value was in its story, in its singularity. It was the complete, preserved artistic soul of Arthur Vance. And a cold, sickening realization washed over me. This was my mother's next move. The trust fund was gone, yes, but Julian's debts, I knew, were a bottomless pit. The Manhattan penthouse, the failed crypto scheme, those were just the public disasters. There would be more. There were always more. My mother would be desperate for another source of capital, and here it was, hidden, forgotten, and, she would assume, unclaimed. I could see it all unfold with perfect, horrifying clarity. She would find a way to declare these assets part of the estate. She would hire some slick appraiser who would see not art, but dollar signs. She would announce the discovery of her father's lost works and plan a grand auction. She would sell his soul to the highest bidder to fund her son's next failure and call it honoring her father's memory. The anger that rose in me was different from the hurt I'd felt at the party. It was a pure, protective fury. She had stolen my future. I would not let her incinerate my grandfather's past. This collection wasn't just an asset to be recovered. It was a legacy to be defended. This was no longer just about the money. This was about everything. And I knew a simple lawsuit wouldn't be enough. I needed to do more than just win. I needed to change the entire game. For the next 2 days, I lived on black coffee and adrenaline, barricaded in my loft. I didn't answer the dozens of calls from my mother, the pleading texts from my father, or the single bewildered message from Julian asking what the hell had happened. I let them all go to voicemail, their words dissolving into the digital ether. They were part of a world that no longer existed for me. My new world was one of action, strategy, and cold, hard facts. My architect's mind took over. I approached the problem not as a wounded daughter, but as a structural engineer facing a compromised building. A direct, frontal assault, a civil lawsuit, was the obvious path, but it was flawed. It was a sledgehammer approach, messy and loud. My mother would thrive in that chaos. She would hire a team of lawyers to drown me in motions and delays. She would leak carefully crafted stories to her social circle, painting me as a money-grubbing child, tearing the family apart over a misunderstanding. She would weaponize the very idea of family against me. In the court of public opinion, where she reigned supreme, I could lose before I even began. The legal battle could take years, and by the time it was over, the glass collection could be scattered to the 4 winds. No, demolishing a structure requires precision. You don't just knock it down. You identify the load-bearing walls, the key structural weaknesses, and you place the charges there. You control the collapse. My mother's load-bearing wall wasn't her money, it was her reputation. Her entire identity was built on the perception of class, grace, and philanthropic leadership within Chicago's elite. Her power came from the belief that she was an untouchable Vance, a pillar of the community. If I could shatter that image, the rest of her world would crumble. I needed a tool more precise and more devastating than a lawsuit. I needed the truth, wielded like a weapon. I spent hours online, not on legal websites, but on the archives of the Chicago Tribune. I was looking for a name, a specific kind of journalist, the kind the powerful and corrupt feared. And then I found him, David Chen. He wasn't a society columnist. He was an investigative reporter with a Pulitzer nomination and a reputation for dismantling white-collar criminals. His portfolio was a graveyard of disgraced CEOs, fraudulent charity organizers, and city officials who thought they were above the law. He specialized in telling stories that weren't just about money, but about betrayal of trust. His most famous piece was an exposé on a real estate tycoon who had used his own family's foundation as a personal slush fund. He was perfect. The thought of inviting a stranger, the media, into the heart of my family's dysfunction was terrifying. It was a violation of the unspoken code I had lived by my entire life. You don't air your dirty laundry in public. But Evelyn had burned that code to the ground. She had turned our family into a public performance at her party. I was simply going to reveal what was happening behind the curtain. I sat at my computer, the glow of the screen illuminating my face in the dark room. I opened a new email. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was the point of no return. Once I hit send, the controlled demolition would begin. There would be no going back to the way things were. A part of me grieved for that, for the illusion of family I had clung to for so long. But the woman who had walked out of that anniversary party was not the same woman sitting here now. I took a deep breath and began to type. 2. D. Chen at chicagotribune.com. From M. Vance at vance-designs.com. Subject: The Theft of the Vance Legacy. An undisclosed story. Mr. Chen, my name is Maya Vance. You do not know me, but you may know my family. I am writing to you because a crime has been committed that goes far beyond money. It involves the fraudulent draining of a $500,000 trust fund and the impending illegal sale of a priceless art collection belonging to my late grandfather, the glass artist Arthur Vance. The perpetrator is my mother, Evelyn Vance. I have proof. And I believe it is a story you will want to tell. I attached a single photo, the glass sculpture named Legacy. Then I hit send. David Chen replied in less than an hour. His email was brief and to the point. No pleasantries. Just an address, a time, and a single sentence. Do not bring a lawyer. The address was for a nondescript coffee shop in Pilsen, an old neighborhood known for its murals and vibrant art scene, far from the polished corridors of power my mother frequented. The choice was deliberate. This was his turf. The next afternoon, I walked in and saw him in a back booth. He looked exactly like his author photo, mid-40s, rumpled tweed jacket, tired eyes that seemed to have seen every possible variation of human greed. He had a notebook and a pen on the table, nothing else. He didn't stand up. He just watched me approach, his gaze sharp and appraising. "Ms. Vance," he said, gesturing to the seat opposite him. "You have my attention." I had spent the morning preparing. I didn't come with a flood of tears or a torrent of angry accusations. I came prepared as if I were presenting a project proposal to a difficult client. I placed a slim portfolio on the table between us. "Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Chen," I said, my voice even. "I won't waste your time. Everything I'm about to tell you is backed by documentation in this folder." He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. "Start from the beginning." I did. I told him about my grandfather, Arthur, about the trust he had created. I laid out the first document, a copy of the original UTMA trust agreement, clearly naming me as the sole beneficiary and my mother as the custodian with a fiduciary duty to act in my best interest. Next, I laid out the bank statements I'd obtained from Ms. Albright, a complete 24-month history. I had highlighted every withdrawal, $20,000, $35,000, 50,000. A steady, systematic draining, the numbers stark and irrefutable. I pointed to the final balance, $12.41. His expression remained neutral, but I saw a flicker of professional interest in his eyes. This was more than just a family squabble. This was clean, documented, large-scale misappropriation. My mother and father used this money, I explained, to finance my younger brother's failed cryptocurrency startup and to purchase a penthouse for him in Manhattan. I have the public records for the apartment sale. The closing date lines up with the two largest withdrawals from my trust. "And your mother's justification?" he asked, finally picking up his pen. "She called it a redistribution for the greater good," I said, the words tasting like poison. "She told me, in front of 20 of her closest friends, that my brother was the future of the family legacy, and I was just an architect." For the first time, he raised an eyebrow. He scribbled a note. "That's a hell of a quote." "Now for the second part," I said, turning to the next section of the portfolio. "This isn't just about the money that was stolen. It's about what she's planning to steal next." I pushed the photographs across the table. High-resolution images I had taken in the warehouse. The forest of glass, the crystalline bird, the towers of light. The final stunning photograph was of legacy. He stared at the photos, his journalistic cynicism melting away for a moment. "My God," he murmured. "I had no idea. I thought Arthur Vance just made those decorative bowls you see at society auctions." "This is his private collection," I said. "No one has seen it. My mother thinks it's junk stored in a warehouse, but she's running out of money, and sooner or later she's going to remember it. She will sell it. She will liquidate his entire soul to pay for her son's lifestyle." Finally, I pushed the last items across the table, the journals. "What are these?" "My grandfather's diaries. He writes about his work, his love for me, and his deep, profound fear that my mother's vanity and ambition would lead to exactly this. He saw it coming." I had bookmarked a few key pages. David Chen opened the first journal and began to read. He was a fast reader, his eyes scanning the pages. I sat in silence, drinking my cold coffee. I watched as his posture shifted. He leaned forward, his expression hardened, the professional detachment replaced by a focused intensity. He had found the heart of the story. It wasn't just about financial crime anymore. It was a tragedy. It was about legacy, betrayal, and the corrosive nature of greed. It was a David Chen story. He closed the journal and looked at me. The weariness was gone from his eyes. They were sharp and clear. "She won't see this coming," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. "We'll need to verify everything, the signatures, the bank records, but if this is what you say it is, Ms. Vance, you're not just going to get your story told. You're going to start a war." "I know," I said. "I'm counting on it." The days that followed our meeting were an exercise in controlled patience. David and his team at the Tribune moved with quiet, methodical efficiency. He had forensic accountants verifying the bank transfers, legal experts examining the trust documents, and art historians providing a preliminary valuation of my grandfather's collection. He called me only when necessary, asking for specific details, names of family friends who were at the party, the address of Julian's Manhattan apartment. Each conversation was brief, professional, and devoid of emotion. I was no longer a subject. I was a source. It was a strange and isolating feeling, but I welcomed it. It kept the grief at bay. Meanwhile, I became a ghost in my own life. I worked remotely, telling my mentor Robert that a family emergency required my attention. He was gracious, telling me to take all the time I needed, his kindness a stark contrast to my own family's cruelty. I spent my evenings at the warehouse, not just guarding the collection but cataloging it. I photographed every piece, measured every dimension, and cross-referenced them with the notes in my grandfather's journals. The work was meticulous, demanding my full attention. It was the only thing that kept me sane. Surrounded by his life's work, I felt his presence, his strength. I was no longer just Maya Vance, the abandoned daughter. I was the curator of the Arthur Vance legacy. My mother, on the other hand, was doing what she always did in a crisis. She was throwing a party. Not a small one. She was the chairwoman of the annual Children's Benevolence Gala, the single most important event on the Chicago philanthropic calendar. It was her crowning social achievement of the year. I found out about it the way she intended the world to find out. A glossy 8-page spread in Chicago Society magazine, which a well-meaning but oblivious friend from college had mailed to me. There was a picture of my mother, radiant in a Carolina Herrera dress, smiling benevolently. The article detailed the gala's purpose, raising money for a new pediatric wing at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. It was a masterclass in public relations, positioning her as the city's compassionate matriarch. My hands were shaking as I read the text. The gala would feature a live auction of fine art and luxury experiences. And then I saw it. The paragraph that made my blood run cold. The highlight of this year's auction, the article gushed, will be the unveiling and sale of a never-before-seen masterpiece by the late, revered artist Arthur Vance. Titled Legacy, the magnificent glass sculpture was one of her father's most personal works and has been graciously donated to the auction by his daughter, Evelyn Vance, in a touching tribute to his generous spirit. Bidding is expected to start in the high six figures. There was a photo, a professionally shot, glowing image of my grandfather's oak tree, the interwoven figures, the opalescent light. It was sitting on a velvet pedestal, lit like a holy relic. She had done it. She had gone to the warehouse. She must have hired a crew to break the old lock, my key no longer necessary. She had walked through his sanctuary, past the dozens of other pieces, and had taken the single most meaningful one. And she wasn't just selling it, she was using it as a prop. She was wrapping her theft in the noble cloak of charity, using a sick child's hospital wing as a shield. It was a move of such breathtaking cynicism, of such profound moral bankruptcy, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. This was her checkmate. In her mind, she had won. Who would dare challenge a woman for selling her own father's art to save children? Who would question this grand public act of generosity? I picked up my phone and sent a single text message to David Chen, attaching a photo of the magazine article. She's making her move. The gala is in 2 weeks. His reply came back in seconds. I know, and we just found something in the trust documents she signed. Something that changes everything. It's no longer just a civil matter. It's a felony. David Chen's words hung in the air of my loft, more potent than the strongest coffee. Felony. The word was a chasm, a line you couldn't uncross. This was no longer just about family betrayal or a violation of fiduciary duty. This was criminal. He asked me to meet him at his office, a cluttered, paper-filled space at the Tribune Tower that hummed with the low-grade chaos of a newsroom. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He laid a document on his desk under the harsh fluorescent lights. It was a photocopy of a page from the trust agreement. It looked innocuous, filled with dense legal jargon. Our legal team has been going through the trust paperwork with a fine-tooth comb, David said, tapping a paragraph with his pen. The original trust, as set up by your grandfather, was a standard UTMA. You gain full control at 25. Custodian has limited powers. Everything by the book. But this document is an amendment. He slid a second paper next to it. It was dated 6 months after my grandfather's death. This amendment, filed by your mother, effectively changed the terms. It granted the custodian, her, broad discretionary powers to invest trust assets in high-risk, high-reward ventures for the potential long-term benefit of the Vance family portfolio. It's a vaguely worded clause, but it's the legal cover she used to justify funding Julian's crypto disaster. But how? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Grandfather would never have signed something like that. He didn't, David said, his voice grim. He pointed to the signature line at the bottom of the amendment. Arthur Vance. It looked like his signature, the same strong, angular script I knew from his journals. We sent a high-resolution scan of this signature, along with authenticated samples from your grandfather's letters and journals, to a forensic document examiner, a man who testifies for the FBI. David let the silence hang in the air for a moment, letting the weight of what was coming settle. It's a forgery, Maya. A brilliant one, almost perfect, but it's a fake. The pressure, the ink flow, the microscopic hesitations, it's not his hand. Your mother didn't just abuse her power as custodian, she fabricated the document that gave her that power in the first place. She faked her dead father's signature to get her hands on your money. The room seemed to tilt. The casual cruelty, the brazen entitlement, that I had understood, but this was different. This was cold, premeditated fraud. This was a crime planned in the dark, executed with a pen. It spoke of a level of deceit I hadn't been able to comprehend. She hadn't just betrayed me, she had spit on his grave. My own signature, on a contract for my life's dream, now seemed like a distant memory from another lifetime. My mother's signature, a forgery on a legal document, was the one that now defined our reality. What does this mean? I asked, my mind struggling to process the implications. It means we move beyond a civil suit for misappropriation, David explained, his eyes fixed on me, gauging my reaction. This is bank fraud. This is forgery. The U.S. Attorney's Office doesn't take kindly to people faking legal documents to move $500,000 around. With this, we're not just telling a story about a family dispute, we're exposing a federal crime. He leaned back in his chair. This gives you leverage you didn't have before. Immense leverage, the kind that can't be spun away by a high-priced PR firm. I stared at the forged signature. My grandfather's name, twisted into a lie. The image of my mother at the gala, smiling for the cameras, flashed in my mind. She was building her public triumph on a foundation of pure criminality. She believed she was untouchable. She believed the rules didn't apply to her. She believed her father's memory, like my future, was hers to consume and repurpose as she saw fit. The gala is in 12 days, I said, a strange, chilling calm descending over me. The path forward was no longer murky. It was a perfectly straight line. She's going to stand on that stage and use his name, his legacy, to bolster her own. She's going to hold up his soul for auction. David nodded slowly. A very public stage. Can you get me a lawyer? I asked. Not for a lawsuit, for an injunction, an emergency court order. I want to freeze the auction of that piece, and I want it served to her on that stage, in front of everyone. A slow, wolfish grin spread across David Chen's face. Now you're thinking like a journalist, he said. I know just the person. The lawyer David recommended was a woman named Maria Flores. She wasn't a society lawyer who negotiated prenups in mahogany-paneled boardrooms. Her office was in a modest building near the county courthouse, and her clients were usually people fighting against foreclosures, insurance fraud, and corporate malfeasance. She had a reputation for being a shark, a tenacious litigator who loved nothing more than taking on the rich and powerful who thought they were above the law. When I sat down in her office and laid out the story, the bank statements, the journals, and finally the forensic examiner's report on the forgery, her eyes lit up with a righteous fire. Oh, she's arrogant, Maria said, a grim smile on her face as she looked at the forged signature. The arrogant ones always leave a trail. They think no one will ever have the nerve to look. For the next week, we worked in a whirlwind of legal preparation. Maria was a force of nature. She drafted an emergency petition to the probate court, not just for an injunction to stop the sale of legacy, but for an order to immediately remove Evelyn Vance as custodian of all of Arthur Vance's assets, including the entire hidden collection, pending a full criminal investigation. The petition was a masterwork of legal savagery. It laid out the facts in cold, brutal detail: the systematic draining of the trust, the clear violation of fiduciary duty, and the damning evidence of forgery. It attached copies of the bank statements, photos of the entire art collection, excerpts from my grandfather's journals, and, as the final, devastating exhibit, the sworn affidavit from the forensic document examiner. The key is to file it under seal, Maria explained, her pen flying across a legal pad. We'll petition the judge for an ex parte hearing. That means your mother and her lawyers won't be notified beforehand. We argue that if she gets wind of this, she could try to move the assets, hide the other pieces, or destroy evidence. Given the evidence of forgery, the judge is very likely to grant it. The hearing was scheduled for the morning of the gala. I sat in the back of the silent, imposing courtroom while Maria argued our case before the judge. She spoke with a quiet, controlled fury, her voice echoing in the chamber as she detailed my mother's brazen and calculated campaign of fraud against her own blood. The judge, an older woman with tired but intelligent eyes, read every page of our petition. She stared at the forensic report for a long time. She looked over at me, her expression unreadable. I held her gaze, my heart pounding. This was it. The moment the gears of justice would either engage or grind to a halt. Finally, she looked back at Maria. "The evidence presented is compelling and deeply troubling," she said, her voice gravelly. She picked up a gavel and stamped the order. "Petition granted. The injunction and the order to freeze all assets are effective immediately. The court will appoint a temporary independent administrator for the estate of Arthur Vance. And I am referring the evidence of forgery to the district attorney's office." I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, a certified copy of the court order in my briefcase. It felt heavier than a block of stone. It was a weapon. Maria put her hand on my shoulder. "Tonight she'll be on her stage," Maria said, "and you will have the law on your side. Are you ready for this, Maya?" I thought of my grandfather. I thought of his name twisted into a lie. I thought of his soul, about to be sold to the highest bidder under the guise of charity. "I'm ready," I said. "I'm not just stopping an auction. I'm reclaiming a legacy." That evening, I didn't wear a suit of armor. I wore a simple, elegant black dress. My only jewelry was a small glass pendant my grandfather had made for me when I was 16. It was my uniform. I was no longer the daughter. I was the architect of my mother's downfall. The ballroom at the Four Seasons was a symphony of manufactured elegance. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The air buzzed with the sound of champagne flutes clinking, polite laughter, and the self-congratulatory hum of Chicago's elite. To them, this was the apex of their social season. To me, it was a crime scene. I moved through the crowd alone, a ghost at the feast. People I had known my entire life, my parents' closest friends, smiled and nodded at me, their eyes sliding past me, looking for someone more important to talk to. They saw only Maya Vance, the quiet architect, Evelyn's reliable daughter. They had no idea they were looking at an explosive device. I saw my father near the silent auction tables, looking lost and diminished in his tuxedo. He caught my eye, and for a moment, a look of pure panic crossed his face. He made a move toward me, his hand outstretched, but I just gave him a small, cold shake of my head. He stopped, his hand falling to his side. The time for talking was over. Then the lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room as my mother, Evelyn Vance, walked onto the stage to a round of enthusiastic applause. She was breathtaking. She wore a custom-made Oscar de la Renta gown of deep emerald green, a river of diamonds at her throat. She glowed with triumph. This was her moment. The culmination of her life's work, not the raising of her children, but the curation of her own public image. Thank you all," she said, her voice resonating with practiced warmth. "Your generosity tonight will change lives." She spoke for 10 minutes, a flawless performance of compassion and grace. She talked about the children. She talked about the hospital. And then, her voice softening with emotion, she began to talk about her father, Arthur Vance. "My father believed that art had the power to heal," she said, a single perfect tear glistening on her cheek. "He believed in giving back, and so, in his honor, I have decided to part with one of his most treasured creations, a piece he called Legacy, to ensure that his spirit of generosity lives on." On cue, 2 stagehands wheeled the sculpture onto the stage. Under the spotlights, it was magnificent. It seemed to absorb all the light in the room and radiate it back, a beacon of pure, heartbreaking beauty. A collective gasp went through the audience. "We will start the bidding at $200,000, the auctioneer, a slick man in a velvet jacket, announced. My signal. I didn't walk from the back of the room. I was already there, standing in the wings, just out of the spotlight's glare. With me were Maria Flores, her face a mask of calm professionalism, and two uniformed Cook County Sheriff's deputies. As the first bid was called, we stepped out of the shadows. We walked calmly, directly toward the stage. The crowd, sensing a disruption, fell silent. The auctioneer faltered, his hand frozen mid-air. My mother, blinded by the spotlights, squinted, a frown of annoyance creasing her perfect brow. "What is the meaning of this?" she started to say. We didn't stop until we were at the foot of the stage. Maria Flores, her voice clear and carrying through the silent ballroom, spoke first. "Evelyn Vance," she said, holding up the court order. "My name is Maria Flores. This is a court-ordered injunction. You are hereby legally prohibited from proceeding with the sale of this artwork." A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. My mother stared, her face a mask of disbelief. "This is absurd. Who do you think you are?" It was my turn. I stepped forward, into the edge of the light. "I am, Mother," I said, my voice steady and clear, no longer the whisper of a ghost, but the confident tone of an architect. "I am the rightful heir to the legacy you are attempting to sell." One of the deputies stepped forward and handed her the papers. "Ma'am," he said, his voice respectful but firm, "you've been served." She stared at the papers in her hand, her face ashen. She looked from the legal crest at the top to my name, listed as the petitioner. Then she looked at me. The mask of the gracious hostess finally shattered, and for the first time, everyone in that room saw her for what she was. A thief, caught in the act. The diamonds around her neck suddenly looked like a collar, the emerald gown a costume, the stage a courtroom dock. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was the sound of a reputation turning to dust. The aftermath was a controlled detonation. The gala ended abruptly, the wealthy guests scattering like frightened birds, whispering into their cell phones. The story didn't just leak, it erupted. David Chen's article went live on the Tribune website before the last valet had even brought a car around. The headline was devastating. Philanthropist Evelyn Vance accused of forgery, defrauding daughter's trust fund in society scandal. The article was a masterpiece of factual annihilation. It had everything: the forged signature, the bank records, the excerpts from my grandfather's journals, and a heartbreaking photo of the legacy sculpture being wheeled into an evidence locker by the court's appointed administrator. It even had quotes from shell-shocked guests who had witnessed the scene. The story was picked up by the Associated Press by dawn. My mother hadn't just fallen from grace, she had been publicly and spectacularly vaporized. The consequences were swift and brutal. The board of the Children's Benevolence Foundation demanded her immediate resignation. Her name was quietly removed from the letterheads of the 3 other charities she sat on. The country club suspended their membership pending review. The invitations to luncheons and winter retreats simply stopped coming. For a woman who had measured her life in social currency, this was a death sentence. The legal consequences were just as severe. The DA's office, armed with the judge's referral and David's mountain of evidence, formally pressed charges: felony forgery, wire fraud, and aggravated theft. Julian's gilded life collapsed like a house of cards. The Manhattan penthouse, bought with stolen money, was now an exhibit in a fraud case. His remaining investors, seeing the Tribune story, pulled their funding. The visionary tech genius was exposed as a coddled man-child funded by his mother's crimes. Within a month, the bank foreclosed on the apartment. The last I heard, he was sleeping on a friend's couch in Queens. My father, implicated by his complicity in silence, was forced into a corner. To avoid charges himself, he agreed to cooperate fully with the DA's investigation against my mother. He left her. He moved into a sterile corporate apartment downtown, a man adrift, stripped of the wife who had directed his life and the daughter he had failed to protect. My mother never went to prison. Her lawyers, facing an ironclad case, negotiated a plea deal. She pled guilty to a single count of felony bank fraud. She was sentenced to 5 years of probation, 2,000 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay full financial restitution. The restitution was a moot point. Her legal fees had already consumed what was left of their liquid assets. But the real punishment, the one that truly broke her, was the social exile. She had lost her audience. She was no longer Mrs. Evelyn Vance, the queen of Chicago society. She was just a convicted felon in a quiet, empty mansion in Oak Brook, the silence broken only by calls from lawyers. For her, it was a fate worse than any jail cell. I had taken away the one thing she couldn't live without, her reflection in the admiring eyes of others. It's spring now, 6 months later. The harsh Chicago winter has given way to a tentative green. From the window of my new office, I can see buds forming on the trees in the park below. The office isn't the one I was supposed to have. It's not the prestigious firm I worked a decade to acquire. It's a small, 2-room studio in a converted loft building, not unlike the one I live in. It's smaller, but it's mine. After the court appointed an administrator to my grandfather's estate, I was given full legal control of his entire art collection. I made the difficult decision to sell 2 of the smaller, less personal pieces to a private collector, a man who had known and respected my grandfather's work. The sale gave me the capital to start my own firm, Vance Designs, on my own terms. The rest of the collection, including Legacy, is now safely in a climate-controlled, insured storage facility. It is not for sale. The space is flooded with natural light. My drafting table sits in the center, and the walls are covered not with awards, but with blueprints for my first 2 projects, a community arts center in a low-income neighborhood and a small, sustainable home for a young family. They are not glamorous projects, but they are honest. They are about building, not just displaying. I never got the $450,000 back. It was gone, vaporized in Julian's crypto fantasy and the Manhattan real estate market. But in a way, I got back something more valuable. I got back myself. My phone buzzes on the corner of the desk. A text from a number I don't have saved, but I know who it is. Maya. It's Julian. I know it's a lot to ask, but I'm broke. I need help. Just a few thousand to get back on my feet. For a moment, the old Maya, the reliable one, the one who fixed things, feels a familiar pang. It's a ghost limb, a habit of the heart. Then, it passes. I don't block his number. I don't type an angry reply. I simply hold down the microphone icon and record a voice message, my tone calm and even, the sound of a door closing not with a slam, but with a quiet, decisive click. Legends have to learn how to get back on their own feet, Julian. The Vance family door is closed, and I'm the one holding the key now. I send the message and turn back to my blueprints. The sun is streaming through the window, and the lines on the paper are clean, clear, and full of promise. They are the lines of a future I am building for myself, one honest piece at a time. This story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the deepest betrayals come not from our enemies, but from those who are supposed to be our protectors. Maya's journey is a brutal but necessary one. Was her mother Evelyn pure evil? In a way, that would be too simple. I see her as a tragic figure, a woman so consumed by the superficial values of status and image that she became blind to true worth, both in her father's art and in her own daughter. Her obsession with making Julian a legend was never about him, it was about her. He was just a canvas for her own unfulfilled ambitions. Her fatal flaw wasn't just greed, it was a profound and incurable vanity. Maya's great triumph wasn't the legal victory or the public shaming of her mother. It was her internal transformation. She started as the strong one by default, absorbing endless neglect because it was easier than confrontation. But true strength, she learns, isn't about silent endurance. It's about drawing a line. Her decision to fight back, not with emotional outbursts, but with her own inherent skills, her meticulousness, her strategic thinking, her architect's mind, is the story's most brilliant turn. She didn't just play her mother's game, she changed the rules and moved the entire game onto her own board. The story leaves us with a profound lesson about boundaries. Setting a boundary with family, especially a parent, can feel like an act of war. It can feel like a betrayal. But as Maya's story shows, sometimes setting that boundary is the ultimate act of self-love and self-preservation. It is not about destroying a family. It is about saving yourself from a dynamic that is already destroying you. What do you think? If you were Maya, could you have done it? Could you have drawn that final public line against your own mother, knowing it would shatter everything? Or is the bond of family, no matter how toxic, something that should never be broken? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you have a story about setting a difficult boundary, I hope you'll share it with our community here. Thank you for listening.